Morning, everybody, or whatever time of day it is there for you. I hope you're doing well and that you are finding the moment beautiful in such a way that draws you out to be even more beautiful and all that good stuff. So, couple things. If you're interested in participating in Circling Dialogos, I think we always have one going. There's a link down below at the Circling Institute. That's the course that I teach with John Vervaeke and Christopher. An amazing thing. We have tons of circling events, weekly events, weekend events, year-long trainings. All of the links for that are down below. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, I am taking clients right now. So what you want to do is email me and just let me know. And what we'll do is we'll set up a time to get together and explore together. Okie dokie. So, A.H. Almaas, The Pearl Beyond Price. So yesterday in the first video, we just started reading this book, and he opens it. Actually, I think it's worth kind of reading the first paragraph here. He opens the first paragraph by saying, at a certain age, very early on in life, each one of us becomes aware of himself or herself as a walking, talking, thinking, feeling being. In short, as a living person. It is such a luminous discovery, but it quickly becomes dull and familiar, dull with familiarity. Then we live our lives as if we now know what it is to be human, as if maturing were only a matter of becoming more of what we think we already are. The mystery is gone, and life becomes tedious and repetitive. So you can kind of see here where it seems like in this first paragraph, he's kind of laying out the dilemma and the possibility, right? And the dilemma is that we all start off kind of in a perpetual state of wonder in some regard, right? Especially as our senses become more formed as infants, right? I have one right now. He's 17 months, years old, and he just walks around kind of like in a perpetual state of, oh my godness, right? In some deep sense. And it makes sense because imagine you like kind of coming from nowhere and finding yourself existing with all the myriad levels of being. However, those very same capacities that allow us to perceive and see and feel and smell and taste and touch and all those kinds of things that allow us to perceive this existence, perceive this being, are the very capacities that become dull, that become that where the world and being becomes repetitive, familiar, and withdrawals into its familiarity, including our sense of ourselves. And so then he's saying that once that starts to happen, right, then we, without even thinking about it, we kind of just assume we know what we're like and we know the potential that we have to live out, that there's nothing outside of that, right? That we live as if that were the case. And so I think laying that out implicitly, kind of, he's recognizing a problem, right? A central problem, a existential problem, a psychological problem, right? But he's also implying here when he says that we live our lives as if we know what it is to be human, as if maturing were only a matter of becoming more of what we think we already are, right? So implied in that, right, is it's possible that we are more. I think what he's getting at is he's implicitly saying it's possible that we are more than what we understand, that it's possible to awaken our senses, our awareness, and develop and have potentials in ourselves to develop, to perceive a world that isn't dull, a self that isn't dull, that goes beyond what we know, beyond what we can imagine, and that there may be something implicit underneath these veils of familiarity that have potential that but can absolutely bring absolute wonder to us. So right in that, I would imagine that first paragraph in some sense embodies what this whole book is about. And so he starts to get at that by in the first reading in two ways, where he starts to talk about the man of spirit and the man of the world. And seems like he's setting up a dialectic, right? Bringing these two apparent opposite things. And in some sense, you can hear him setting up a challenge that there's contradictions in the world of the man of the spirit and the man of the world. Something like, I would imagine the contradiction is that the spiritual guy is something like the only thing that matters is spirit, the man of the world, the only thing that matters is personal, and therefore there's a dualism. And I think where he's heading is in this dialectic is probably some sense in which that which is most personal may be that which is actually most spiritual, and that which is most spiritual in some way may actually be that which is most personal. Okay. So I think he's going on where we left off. Let me find it here. Where we left off reading is basically he poses this the man of spirit, the man of the world, and now I think he's going deep into looking at the man of spirit first. So starting here on the second paragraph. Western psychology shares the common cultural perspective that the self is and must be the central axis of life. Its view regarding the personal self can be seen as the expression and crystallization of the view of the man of the world, cast in scientific language. It considers mental health the expression of a strong, cohesive personal self with a separate sense of identity. The founder of self-psychology puts it this way. Mental health is often defined by analysis, in harmony with the remark ascribed to Freud, rather loosely and extra scientifically, as a person's ability to work and to love. Within the framework of psychology of the self, we define the mental health not only as freedom from the neurotic symptoms and inhibitions that interfere with functions of a mental apparatus involved in loving and working, but also as the capacity for a firm sense of self to avail itself of the talents and skills at an individual's disposal, enabling him to work and to love and to work successfully. I think I actually started too soon, because I think we read this yesterday. Let me pause. Yep, sorry about that. All right, I'm supposed to start on the next page. Okay, so starts up here, it's top of the page. Lao Tzu, the legendary founder of Taoism in China, the reputed author of the Tao Te Ching, equates trouble with the belief in the individual self. In one of the stanzas in the book, he observes, people are beset with great trouble because they assert that there is an individual self. If they take nothing personal, then what can they call trouble? So you can kind of see here this, I think there's like infinite depth in the way that you can read Tao Te Ching, but I think in what he's highlighting here is that you could also, one reading of Tao Te Ching is you could see it as diminishing the personal, as discarding the personal, and in favor of something higher, right? I think is the point he's making. These two approaches to human life are diametrically opposed to each other. So he's highlighting a dualism that he sees, Almaas, that is. The most well-known profound teachings about human nature point one way, and humankind in general is going another way, or at least so it seems. The contradiction between the two perspectives is not only an appearance, it is quite real and has far-reaching consequences for human life and for the course of human evolution. They are divergent paths, each with its own values, aims, and consequences. So he's highlighting the contradiction, and he's saying, I think what I hear him say is that he's saying that the contradiction between the man of spirit and the man of the world, this two worlds mythology, is at the very guts of our cognition. It's like in the well water that the consequences of this split, or this perceived split, right, has drastic consequences for us. And I would say consequences that we live out without seeing, right? It's just it's like it's in the well water. He goes on. One might be tempted to believe that the spiritual teachings are simply the opinions or beliefs of certain individuals or of religious systems, which are not meant to apply to all people. But this is far from the truth. All major spiritual teachings stress impersonality, universality, selflessness, egolessness, and the denigration of the personal. It is true that the various traditions differ in their emphasis and outlook, but they all extol selflessness, egolessness, and the surrender of personal life to higher reality. The Far Eastern traditions generally see the ultimate human nature as impersonal and universal. Enlightenment, and hence liberation and fulfillment, are seen to be the consequence of realizing that the individual is a mistaken identity, and that this true nature is the ultimate truth, whether this is seen as God, Hinduism, the Tao, Taoism, or the void, Buddhism. Prophetic religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, consider the human being an individual soul who needs to live a life of surrender to God's will, egolessness, selflessness, and virtue. Reward is understood to come in the hereafter, Jesus Christ. In the Sermon on the Mount, makes this clear. Happy are you when men insult you and mistreat you, and tell all kinds of evil that lies against you, because you are my followers. Rejoice and be glad, because a great reward is kept for you in heaven. Okay, so I think he's kind of getting at what we just said earlier here, is that he's saying, we may be tempted to think that this split between the ultimate, the void, spirit, and this privileging of that, and over against the ego, the personal, the self, may just be the religious proclivities. That may just be the tendency of the religions. But what I think he's kind of starting to set up here is that no, this view goes much deeper than that and has much far-reaching consequences. He goes on. However, the mystical side of the prophetic tradition tends to be closer to the Far Eastern view of the ultimate non-existence of the person. Mystical mystical Christianity conceives of God as the ultimate ground and being of the individual, as the following text clearly indicates. He is your being, and in him you are what you are, not only because he is the cause and being of all that exists, but because he is your cause and the deep center of your being. And thus, also, he is one in all things, and all things are one in him. For I repeat, all things exist in him. He is the being of all. That's the cloud of unknowing. This view of the oneness of all existence in God indicates that existence of a personal self is not ultimate, and that salvation is the realization of this oneness. The great Sufi author, Ibn Arabi, goes even further and asserts that there is nothing but God, to quote him. And for this, the prophet, upon whom be peace, said, quote, "Whoso knoweth himself knoweth the Lord," unquote. And he said, upon him be peace, "I know my Lord by my Lord." The prophet, upon whom be peace, point out by that thou art not thou. Thou art he, without thou, not he entering into thee, nor thou entering into him, nor he proceeding forth from thee, nor thou proceeding forth from him. And it is not meant by that thou art aught that exists, are thine attributes aught that exist, but is meant by it that thou never wast nor will be, whether by thyself or through him or in him or along with him. Thou art never, neither ceasing to be nor still existing. Thou art he, without one of these limitations. Then in thou know thine existence thus, then thou knowest God. And if not, then not. I'm impressed I was able to stumble through that one. And that's from, I guess, his book, Whoso Knoweth Himself. Okay, I'll read this one more paragraph. As we see, this is Almaas again, as we see, these teachings are unanimous in their evaluation of personal life as less important than some higher realm. What does this mean? Does it mean that the majority of humankind are completely astray, are so wrong and ignorant and completely out of touch with their nature that they go in the exact opposite direction from where they should be heading? Okay, so here he begins the challenge, right? Here comes the argument, I think, and the dialectic. He's basically kind of bringing up this really interesting point, right? If all the mystical traditions, all the religious traditions in some way privilege this higher realm, right? And show that the kind of personal or the individual is stuck in a lower realm or all the way doesn't even exist. Therefore, to have one is to be an illusion. And all the various forms of that. All the religions are saying that. Is it that they're also saying that somehow most of the world that's living out of an individual personal self is deluded? Is the ego or the personal self, is it a mistake? Is it like, what happened? Did the ultimate kind of burp at the wrong time and they made a mistake and now it's all being played out? But wait a minute, the ultimate's perfect. So how could it not be perfect, right? So there's all these kinds of questions that we can start to ask about this. So he's kind of going, he's asking this really, really, you know, quite astute question, and more than fair question is like, why do all the traditions say this, right? And why is not the world then more spiritual than it is? In fact, it's kind of, in some sense, in many of these traditions, the world itself is the evil and the fallenness from grace, from unity. So mark that question. He goes on. Many people, of course, believe just that the life of the world is antithetical to the life of spirit and truth. In fact, most of the great teachers have stressed that the life of the world is not the religious or the true life. But let us not hasten to conclusions. Is it possible, of course, that the majority of humankind are astray, are on the wrong path to human fulfillment? However, this does not explain why they are all on the same path. Why is it that all humans are pursuing personal happiness, wanting to lead a personal life where self and individuality are valued and cherished? In other words, if the ultimate goal of the human being is the universal, impersonal truth of spirit, why is it that all humans end up with an ego, with a self, and a personality? Can it be just a mistake, a colossal mistake? And if it is, then why is it made so universally? So I practically, in my previous comment before this, I practically wrote that exact chapter, that last paragraph out. Okay. In this book, our interest is to understand the nature of the human being in a comprehensive way, a way that makes sense of the normal experience of most individuals, while retaining the deepest insights into human nature as seen in the most profound spiritual discoveries of mankind. We will introduce an understanding about the human nature by contrasting the view of the man of the world, the usual perspective of most people who take the person and the personal life to be the center of human nature and concern, with the view of the man of spirit, the spiritual perspective of most religions, that man's nature is ultimately spiritual and human life must be governed by selflessness and egolessness. The most extreme position of this latter perspective is that self-individuality do not have an ultimate or real existence. The extreme position, although not shared by many spiritual groups, nevertheless remain a common and central contention for the most advanced teachings of most spiritual traditions, especially the mystical ones. More specifically, we will contrast the experience of most people that they are separate individuals, entities in their own right, with the contention of many spiritual traditions that the ultimate reality is a state of oneness, of being, and unity of existence, and explore the relationship between the two. So, in my experience with Almaas and the people who were taught by Almaas, and what I know about Almaas, right, which is my own limited experience of that. He's kind of demonstrating what I really appreciate about his work, right? Is he's basically saying, I want to go into the very guts of our previous understandings about what we take as self-evident, right? About our notions of spirit and the self, right? And look at where those come from and see the contradictions in them, bring them into dialogue, notice the contradictions, see how they actually presuppose each other in ways that they don't account for, and confront, like actually confront our ideas about these things. And I think what he is going to show is that very inquiry will take us down to a place where they not only connect, but perhaps come out of the same ground, so to speak. They never were disconnected. But that very connection is the very way of a possible spiritual, personal path, however you want to call it. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and see you soon.